What if the person you saved was the very man the world feared most? What if your kindness tangled you in a world of guns, secrets, loyalty, and danger? And what if the monster everyone feared learned how to love because of you? Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's video, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments below. It truly amazes me how far our community reaches around the world. All right, now let's begin. Snow fell in slow, silent flakes, turning the narrow alleyway behind the cafe into a pale, glittering path. The air was still, too still, like the world was holding its breath. Luella Hart, wrapped in a worn wool coat, stepped outside to take out the trash, her cheeks pink from the winter air. She had always loved snow. It made even broken things look pure. But tonight, the snow wasn't clean. A dark streak of red cut through the white, leading to a collapsed figure slumped near the dumpster. Her heart jumped, her breath caught, and for a second, her body froze like the air around her. She had seen blood before. Life hadn't been gentle, but never like this. Not this much, not this silent. The man lay face down, black coat torn, fingers curled into the snow as if he'd been dragging himself. A gun, cold, dark, real, lay inches from his hand. Every part of Luella screamed to step back, to run, to pretend she saw nothing. But her feet moved anyway. She knelt beside him, her small hands trembling as she turned him slightly. His face, sharp jaw, dark lashes dusted with snowflakes, blood streaked across his shirt. He wasn't just injured, he was fighting death. His lips parted, breath faint, a whisper escaping. "Don't call anyone." His voice was gravel and pain. She didn't know his name, she didn't know who he was. But something inside her, the soft, stubborn part that always believed people could be saved, moved faster than fear. She pressed her hands to his wound. "Stay with me," she whispered, even though he was barely conscious. The snow fell heavier, covering both of them, as if the night itself was choosing to hide this moment. Her breath came out in shaky clouds, but her mind sharpened. She had been raised in a small town hospital where her mother was a nurse, and hands learn what minds fear. "I need to stop the bleeding," she muttered to herself, though he could no longer hear. She tore her scarf, a gift from her late mother, and pressed it hard against his side. Warm blood soaked through the fabric instantly, seeping into her palms. He was strong. She could feel it in the tense weight of him. A man used to control, used to power. But now he was helpless, fragile in a way that made something ancient stir in her chest. Protectiveness. Still, dread crawled up her spine. A bleeding man with a gun meant danger. Not accident, not misfortune, violence. She should have run. She should have screamed. She should have called the police. But some part of her knew, if she called for help, whoever did this would finish the job before help arrived. Someone wanted this man dead. And if she involved herself further, they might want her dead too. But she did not pull away. She couldn't. So she hooked her arm under his and dragged him, inch by inch, through the snow, down the back stairs into the small storage room behind the cafe. He was heavy, far heavier than her thin arms should have been able to lift. But fear lends strange strength, and compassion lends even more. By the time she locked the door behind them both, her shirt was streaked with his blood. She looked at him again, pale but alive. Whoever he was, fate had placed him in her hands tonight, and she had chosen to save him. 20 minutes later, his eyes opened. The room was dimly lit by a flickering bulb, shadows trembling across crates of coffee beans and dusty shelves. Luella sat across from him on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, hands still red. His gaze found her slowly, dark and sharp, like waking steel. There was something dangerous about him, something that filled the small room like invisible smoke. But he didn't move. He just stared. "You should have walked away," he rasped. His voice was quiet, not grateful, not cold, just true. Luella swallowed hard. I couldn't. His jaw tightened in confusion, like he was unused to being saved. He tried to sit up, pain cutting through him, and she rushed forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. The contact startled them both. His muscles were tense, coiled like a predator's. Her touch was gentle, uncertain. Don't move too much, she whispered. The bullet went deep, but I stopped the bleeding. I think you'll live. He looked at her then, not with suspicion, but curiosity, like she was a type of creature he'd never seen. He asked, "What's your name?" "Luella," she breathed. A strange quiet settled between them, soft, fragile. His eyes flickered. "I am Cassian Vale." The name hit the air with weight. She didn't recognize it, but she would. The world feared that name, and she had just saved him. A sharp knock shattered the quiet. Luella's heart shot up into her throat. Cassian's expression hardened instantly. No pain now, only threat. He silently reached for the gun she had set aside. His eyes met hers once. Silent warning. Do not speak. Do not move. Footsteps moved outside, slow, searching. A voice muffled through the door. "We saw blood in the snow. He couldn't have gotten far." Luella clamped her mouth to keep from gasping. Cassian lifted the gun, hand steady even while injured, gaze locked on the door like a wolf waiting for the first step of prey. The doorknob twitched. Luella's breath stopped. Then, silence. The footsteps faded. The night held still again. Cassian's hand lowered, but his body remained tense. "They're hunting you," she whispered. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He just looked at her, unreadable. Then, "If they know you helped me, they will come for you too." Fear flooded her, cold and real. She looked at her hands, still stained with his blood. She didn't regret helping him, but now the world had changed. Her world. Cassian's gaze softened, not with warmth, but recognition. She was afraid, but she had not run. That mattered. He shifted, voice low but steady. "From this moment forward, your life is tied to mine." Luella didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. But she understood the truth behind his words. She was no longer invisible. No longer just a kind girl working in a cafe. She had entered a story written in shadows and bullets. Cassian Vale, Mafia boss, feared man, hunted ghost, owed him his life. And debts in his world were never small. Snow continued falling outside, silent and endless. Inside the locked storage room, two strangers sat facing each other, one wounded, one trembling, both changed forever. Neither spoke, neither looked away. Fate had chosen them. This was how their story began. Morning came slow and gray, sliding through thin curtains and lighting the cafe storage room in weak winter light. Luella hadn't slept. She sat with her back against a crate, knees pulled to her chest, watching the injured stranger, Cassian Vale, sleep unevenly on the floor. The ache in her arms from dragging him, the dried blood on her hands, the weight of what she had done, all of it made the world feel unfamiliar, like she was inside a dream she couldn't wake from. Outside the door, life went on. Cars drove by, people hurried down sidewalks, cups clinked, laughter rose, everything normal. Yet inside this small room, something irreversible had begun. Luella knew she needed answers, but her fear had softened into something else, curiosity laced with disbelief. Who was he beyond the violence? Why had someone wanted him dead badly enough to hunt him through snowfall? His breathing stirred, his eyes opened. Pain flickered across his expression, but his gaze steadied when he saw her. No surprise this time, just awareness. "You stayed," he murmured. She nodded because words felt small. If you can walk now, I can help you leave before the cafe opens," she whispered. Cassian attempted to sit up, jaw tightening as the wound pulled. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Leaving isn't enough," he said. The tone in his voice changed. deepening, sharpening. You need to understand what you've done. Luella's heart skipped. She didn't move, didn't blink. Cassian held her eyes. You saved the life of the man who leads the Vale Syndicate. The world seemed to tilt. Even she who avoided the news had heard whispers of that name. A criminal empire, ruthless, untouchable, the kind of name that made cities go quiet. Her breath trembled. So I saved a mafia boss. His silence was confirmation. Cassian watched the realization settle in her, slow, heavy, like snow weighing down branches. Most people, upon discovering who he was, reacted in one of three ways: awe, fear, or calculation. But Luella's reaction was different. Her eyes filled not with horror nor fascination, but something closer to sorrow. You're hurt, she said simply, as if his identity didn't change the fact that he was a bleeding man on her floor. The simplicity of her concern disarmed him more than any weapon could. No one had looked at him as a man in years, only as power or threat. He studied her carefully. Small-town gentleness, quiet eyes, the color of faded honey, a softness in her movements. But there was steel there too. She had not run. Why? He asked. His voice was steady, but the question came from someplace deeper. Why did you save me? Luella hesitated, searching for words that made sense. Because someone had to. Not noble, not naive, just human. Cassian leaned his head back against the crate, expression unreadable. People don't help men like me without wanting something in return. Luella shook her head softly. I didn't even know who you were. That landed differently. Heavy. Real. For a long moment, neither spoke. His breath was shallow, but strength flickered behind it. You should fear me. Luella looked down at her blood-marked hands. Maybe I should, but right now, you're just a person who would have died alone in the snow. Something flickered in his eyes, something like disbelief, or something like gratitude. He wasn't sure which hurt more. They moved before sunrise, slow, quiet, cautious. Luella helped him to his feet, his arm draped over her shoulders. Though weakened, his presence filled the space like gravity itself had weight. Every step was a careful negotiation between pain and necessity. The city was waking up. Fresh bread smells drifted from nearby bakeries. Workers trudged through frost. A bus hissed to a stop. The world seemed gentle, unsuspecting. But Cassian's world was anything but. He scanned every shadow, every parked car, every passing stranger. His guard was not habit. It was survival. Luella guided him through narrow back streets she'd walked since childhood, paths only locals knew. He noticed that. She could have turned him in. She could have led him into the open. But instead, she was leading him away from danger. There was an old boarding house along the river, she whispered. It's quiet. Hardly anyone goes there anymore. Cassian exhaled, half of relief, half of exhaustion. They reached a narrow bridge where frost glittered like shattered stars. He stopped, gripping the railing. Luella. His voice was strained. She looked up. His eyes held warning and something else. Something protective. The men hunting me, they are not amateurs. They are not impulsive. They are patient. If they learn you touched this, his hand indicated the wound at his side, they will remove you till you erase the story. Luella's breath fogged in the cold. Fear shivered through her, but she didn't step back. She looked at him steadily. I understand. Cassian's jaw clenched. He expected panic, denial, bargaining, not acceptance. It unsettled him deeply. She didn't know yet that the moment she touched him, she became part of his world, and his world did not let go. They reached the boarding house, old red brick, chipped window frames, ivy long dead for winter. Luella pushed the door open, and it groaned like an old man waking. The lobby smelled of pine soap and dust. Empty, quiet, forgotten. a place for secrets to rest unseen. She led him to a small room upstairs, one bed, one chair, one narrow window overlooking the river. Cassian sat down, slowly, breath shaking as the wound tugged. Luella knelt again, checking the makeshift bandage. Her touch was careful, but her expression had changed. Less panic, more determination. "You need stitches," she murmured, "and antibiotics, and rest. Days of it." Cassian watched her. "You speak like someone who's done this before." Her hands paused. Her voice softened. "My mother was a nurse. I used to help her after school." A quiet sadness flickered through her tone. Cassian didn't press. He recognized grief when it shadowed a person. She worked in silence, rewrapping the bandage with steady fingers. He studied her profile, the way she focused fully, the way she didn't flinch from blood or closeness. Cassian said quietly, "Luella." She looked up. His gaze held weight, not threat. "You have tied your life to mine, whether you meant to or not. I cannot promise safety. I cannot promise peace." He paused, the truth like a blade. "But I do not forget the hands that saved me." Luella's chest tightened. She didn't know why those words felt like both a vow and a warning. Maybe they were both. Luella left the boarding house only once that morning, to fetch medicine and food. When she returned, Cassian was standing by the window, staring at the river, wrapped in shadows and quiet thought. He didn't turn right away. "The men hunting me," he said at last, "are not just rivals. One of them was once my brother." The words struck the room like a dropped glass, sharp, splintering. Luella froze, the bag of supplies heavy in her hand. "Your brother?" Cassian nodded once, slow. His expression did not crack, but pain lived behind his eyes. "Blood means nothing in my world. Loyalty does." His voice was steady, but something inside it trembled. "He betrayed me, took men, took money. And last night, he tried to take my life." Luella felt the weight of his story like cold air entering her lungs. Betrayal was a wound deeper than bullets. She set the bag down gently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Cassian's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in the effort of holding something in. He turned toward her fully now. The winter light haloed through the window behind him, outlining him not as a monster, but as a man who had lost too much. "Remember this," he said, voice low. "Those who come for me will come for you. But as long as I breathe, no hand will touch you." The promise settled into her bones, not frightening, but strangely grounding. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt seen. The river outside flowed quietly beneath newly fallen snow. Two strangers, two pasts, one dangerous thread tying them together. And though neither would say it yet, the story between them had already begun to change shape inside their hearts. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. The boarding house became a fragile sanctuary hidden beneath a world of danger. Snow continued falling outside, like the sky was trying to bury the city in silence. Inside, Cassian Vale healed slowly. His breaths were still strained, movements cautious, but life began returning to his posture. The kind of life that carried authority, command, gravity. Luella, meanwhile, existed in a strange new rhythm. The world outside remained ordinary, while inside this room lived a man the city whispered about like a ghost story. And yet, she did not fear him. She feared the consequences of helping him, yes, but him, as a man, she didn't. Maybe it was because she had seen him at his weakest, or because she had witnessed the flicker of vulnerability behind the steel. Or maybe it was because she had always believed that no one was born a monster. Life shaped them into what they had to become to survive. She brought him meals, changed his bandages, and sometimes just sat in the quiet with him. They didn't talk much. Words felt too heavy. There were glances instead, careful, unspoken things. A shared silence that felt almost like trust. Cassian rarely asked her questions. He didn't pry into her life or her past, but he watched the way she moved, the way she tried to hide her sadness, the way she let people hurt her too easily. And Luella watched him, not with curiosity of the Mafia boss he was rumored to be, but with the understanding of someone who saw another lonely soul. The room was still small, cold and worn, but in those days, it became something more. Not safe, not warm, but something that resembled connection. One evening, while Luella was preparing a broth on the small stove, Cassian spoke unexpectedly. "You live alone." It wasn't a question. She paused, ladle hovering over the pot. "Yes." His gaze remained on her back. "Your parents?" The steam from the pot seemed to thicken. "My mother died last winter." Luella kept her voice even, stirring slowly. "We lived in a small town near the mountains. When she fell sick, I brought her here to get better treatment. But we were too late." She poured the broth into a bowl, hands steady by force. Cassian's jaw tightened. "And your father?" She hesitated. Something in the room shifted. "He left when I was 9. She set the bowl in front of him, but did not sit. He wasn't cruel, just tired. Life was heavier than he could carry." Cassian's eyes lifted to her, slow, searching. Luella forced a small smile. "I guess everyone leaves eventually." It was meant to sound light. It didn't. The air thickened between them. Cassian reached for the bowl, but stopped halfway, not because of pain, but because the weight of what she said settled into him like a stone sinking to the bottom of deep water. "Not everyone," he said quietly. Luella looked up. The words held no promise, no romance. Just truth. There were some people who stayed, not because they were bound to, but because they chose to. Cassian had been abandoned, betrayed, hunted by his own blood. He understood the wound she carried because it mirrored his. For the first time, Luella felt seen, not pitied, seen. Cassian healed faster than any normal man should, strength returning not just to his body, but to the way he stood, the way he breathed, the way the air seemed to shift around him. A protector's instinct, sharpened by a lifetime of survival. One afternoon, Luella was adjusting his bandage when his hand lifted and stopped her wrist. Not harsh, just intentional. She looked up, startled. His eyes held something raw. "You should hate me. You should throw me to the police, to the men hunting me, to fate." She swallowed. "Why?" Cassian's jaw flexed. "Because men like me bring ruin to everything we touch." The room fell into a hush that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Luella shook her head slowly. "No one is ruined simply because they are known by someone broken." Cassian's chest rose and fell. His grip loosened, but he didn't pull away. Luella didn't either. It was only a touch, a simple meeting of skin to skin, but it carried a language neither of them spoke out loud. A promise forming without words. A bond neither had asked for. The air felt warmer, the silence louder. Neither moved first. Neither wanted to. The fragile stillness shattered that night. Luella had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head resting lightly against the edge of the mattress. Cassian had managed to drift into shallow sleep when he heard it, so soft most people would have missed it. A door downstairs, the faintest shift of floorboards. Silence. Then another step. Cassian's eyes snapped open, instantly awake, instantly deadly. He reached for the gun beneath the pillow and leaned forward, touching Luella's shoulder. She woke quietly, eyes widening at the look in his. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Danger. The kind that stalks. The kind that kills. Footsteps crept up the stairs, slow, deliberate, not the hesitant steps of a resident, the calculated approach of a hunter. Cassian moved silently, placing himself between Luella and the door, gun raised, expression ice cold. Luella's breath shook, but she did not scream, she did not run. She stayed behind him, hands pressed to her chest, listening to the rhythm of her heartbeat. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. A pause. The doorknob turned. Cassian's fingers settled on the trigger, slow, steady, controlled. The door opened, but instead of a gunman entering, a slender figure stepped inside, wrapped in a dark coat, face hidden beneath a hood. Luella nearly choked on her breath. Cassian did not lower the gun. The figure raised two hands slowly, empty. "It's me." The voice was low, male, familiar. Cassian exhaled a sound somewhere between relief and anger. "Rian?" The hood lowered. A young man stood in the doorway, sharp cheekbones, haunted eyes, fingers ink-stained from years of writing, not fighting. He was Cassian's consigliere, his second in command, his confidant, not the brother who betrayed him. The other one, the one who stayed. Rian's gaze flicked to Luella and something unreadable passed through his expression. "So it's true. You let someone save you?" Cassian didn't respond. Rian stepped further inside, closing the door behind him. "The betrayal runs deeper than we thought," he said quietly. "Your brother is no longer working alone." Cassian's grip on the gun tightened. Rian's gaze shifted to Luella again. "And if she's involved, they'll come for her next." The room grew cold. Luella's pulse roared in her ears. Cassian stepped slightly closer to her, not touching, but shielding. A silent declaration. Rian raised his eyebrow, not surprised, but acknowledging something quietly powerful. "Then," Rian said, voice flat, "we move her, or we protect her." His gaze locked with Cassian's. Cassian didn't hesitate. "We protect her." And with those 4 words, Luella's life was no longer her own. The decision settled in the room like thunder that never quite finished rolling. "We protect her." Luella felt the weight of those words settle over her skin like a cloak she hadn't asked to wear. Cassian had said it calmly, as though protection were simple, as though danger did not have 1,000 doors and 1,000 faces. Rian studied her with analytical eyes that measured consequences, outcomes, risks. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't soft either. "If they know she helped you," he said, voice steady, "her name is already on a list." Luella's mouth went dry. "A list?" Rian nodded. "A list of people to erase." The walls seemed to shrink around her. Outside, the river kept moving like nothing was happening, like the world did not bend and break around unseen battles. Cassian did not look at her with pity. He looked at her like a choice, one he had already made. "You saved my life," he said quietly, "so now your life is my responsibility." His words carried no romance, no softness, just a vow carved from the same stone as his scars. Luella swallowed. She didn't want to be someone's burden. She didn't want to be someone's leverage. "I didn't do it so you would owe me," she whispered. "I know." Cassian's gaze held hers. "That is why I do." Their eyes stayed on each other, unbroken, until Ryan quietly cleared his throat. We need to move, before they track the blood trail here. The night outside was quiet, too quiet. Danger didn't knock twice, it entered. Ryan pulled a small black phone from his coat and typed something quickly. Safe House 3 is compromised. 4 burned last month. 5 is watched. He looked up. We have 2 options. Cassian's jaw tightened, not at the danger, but at the narrowing of control. We leave the city, Ryan continued, disappear, go dark, wait for your body to heal and strike when ready. Cassian shook his head almost before the sentence ended. Running gives him ground. He'll think I'm afraid. Ryan didn't argue. They had had this conversation before. Pride wasn't Cassian's flaw. It was survival instinct carved into bone. Then option 2, Ryan said. We stay. We move her into the Vale district. Luella blinked. The Vale district? The neighborhood everyone avoids after dark? Ryan gave the slightest shrug. Because it's protected. No outsider moves there. No police. No rival syndicate. No one steps foot across the boundary unless they're invited or suicidal. Luella looked between them. So, I'd be living among your people? Cassian's expression shifted, hard to read. You would be under my protection. Luella felt the invisible line she was crossing, one that separated ordinary life from a world built on shadows. She took a breath. Then we stay. Cassian's eyes flickered, approval, but also something else, something like respect. Ryan nodded once and stepped toward the window, checking the street below with practiced precision. We leave in 5 minutes. No lights, no hesitation. The choice was made. There was no going back. They moved quickly. Cassian pulled on a dark coat Ryan had brought, its weight familiar, its cut sharp, authoritative. Even injured, his presence shifted the air. He was no longer the fading man in the snow. He was the king returning to his throne. Luella slipped on her worn wool coat, but her hands trembled when she reached for the doorknob. Cassian noticed. He walked close, not touching her, but near enough that she felt shielded. Fear is not weakness, he murmured. His voice was low, steady. Fear means you understand what matters. She nodded, even though her throat was tight. They stepped out into the night. The city was quiet, snow-coating rooftops and sidewalks in soft silver. Breath clouds rose in the air as they walked. Ryan led, scanning shadows. Cassian walked beside Luella, slowly, carefully, because every step tugged at his wound, but he did not let it show. Luella glanced at him once. The world feared this man, crossed streets to avoid him, whispered his name like a curse, and yet here he was, protecting her, not because he needed to, but because he chose to. A car waited on a side street, black, windows tinted. Ryan opened the back door. Get in. Cassian entered first, then Luella. The doors shut. The city outside blurred. As the car cut through snow-veiled streets, Luella watched buildings pass like memories dissolving. With each block, she was leaving the life she knew. With each moment, entering a life bound to his. They crossed an invisible boundary. Luella felt it before she saw it. The Vale district wasn't loud or chaotic. It wasn't dirty or crowded. It was quiet. Streets were clean, windows unshattered. Lamplights glowed warm against the snow. But there was an energy in the air, an alertness. People on corners didn't loiter. They watched. Doors were locked not out of fear, but out of loyalty. The car slowed before its tall-stone building, ivy frozen along its walls. It looked like an old estate, but the iron security gates said otherwise. Ryan stepped out first. Cassian followed slowly, posture straight despite the wound. Luella exited last, snow crunching under her boots. A man approached from the door, broad shoulders, thick beard, cold eyes that softened only when they landed on Cassian. Boss? He bowed his head, not out of servitude, but out of allegiance. Cassian nodded once. "This is Luella Hart," he said. The man's gaze flicked to her, assessing, not judging. Cassian's was deepened. "She is under my protection." The air shifted instantly. The man straightened, stance altering. Understanding settled. Luella wasn't a guest. She wasn't a hostage. She was marked by the boss. In this world, that meant she was untouchable. The man stepped aside, allowing them into the building, but Luella felt the weight of what had just happened. She had been given a shield, one that came with chains, visible and invisible. The interior of the estate was warm, fireplate flickering and stone hearths, shadows dancing across wooden beams, leather furniture worn with history. Cassian's world wasn't lavish. It was functional, strategic. Everything had purpose. Ryan disappeared down a hallway to prepare rooms and notify trusted guards. Cassian sank carefully into an armchair, breathing shallow. Luella hovered before him, not sure whether to sit, to stand, or to speak. "Come here," Cassian said softly. Not a command, a request. Luella stepped closer. He looked up at her, eyes no longer the cold steel of a syndicate boss, but something human, tired, grieving, carrying too much. "You need to understand something," he said. "In my world, protection is not passive. If you are under my name, it means war on anyone who touches you. It means loyalty returns with loyalty." Luella's hands curled at her sides. "And what if I am afraid?" Cassian's expression softened, subtly, but unmistakably. "Then I fight harder." Her breath trembled. Something in her chest ached, not fear, recognition. Two lonely lives pulled into orbit by chance, by danger, by something neither yet had the courage to name. Cassian leaned back, eyes dark and heavy with exhaustion. "Rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow everything begins." Luella looked at him, feeling the shift inside herself. The girl who lived quietly in a cafe was gone. The girl standing here was something else, someone shaped by choice, not circumstance. And though fear still lived inside her, so did something stronger, a reason to stay. Morning light filtered through tall, arched windows, soft and golden, painting the estate in a warm glow that didn't match the danger that lived inside its walls. Luella woke in a guest room on the second floor, simple but comfortable. A quilted blanket covered her, the air faintly scented with cedar and old books. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the blood, the snow, the whispered threats in the night. But then the memory returned. Cassian's voice promising protection, Ryan's watchful eyes, the name of the man who wanted him dead. She sat up slowly. From her window, she could see the Vale district below. Orderly streets, early workers clearing snow from storefronts, neighbors greeting one another with nods of familiarity. It was peaceful, but not free. The peace was enforced by unseen boundaries, by loyalty, by fear. And now, she was inside the heart of it. She dressed quietly and stepped into the hallway, her footsteps light on the polished wood. Voices drifted from the first floor, low, steady, controlled. When she reached the staircase, she saw men at the long dining table, armed, sharp-eyed, loyal. They all rose slightly when Cassian entered the room. Even injured, he commanded gravity. Clothing simple, expression calm, presence unmistakable. Luella paused at the bottom of the stairs, unsure if she belonged in this world of silent alliances and unspoken orders. Cassian turned. His gaze softened when he saw her. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The simple shift in his expression said everything. "You're safe. I know you're here." He gestured for her to join the table. The room shifted, not with suspicion, but with acknowledgement. She was not an outsider anymore. She had been claimed by circumstance and by choice. As Luella took a seat beside Cassian, she felt eyes on her. Not hostile, but curious. These were men who lived by loyalty and survival. Their world did not often make room for softness. At the head of the table, Cassian spoke with quiet authority. This is Luella Hart. She is under my protection. If any harm comes to her, it will be answered as harm to me. Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but binding. A man with dark braids nodded respectfully. A woman with a stern jaw and calculating eyes simply said, "Understood." This was not a polite welcome. It was an oath. Breakfast passed mostly in silence, with quiet conversation exchanged in low tones. Luella noticed how everyone moved, efficient, observant, always aware of exits and angles. These were not thugs. They were soldiers, strategists, people forged by necessity. After the meal, Cassian guided Luella to a smaller room overlooking the snowy courtyard. The fireplace burned low. He stood, leaning slightly on a chair for support, though he tried to hide the weakness from his injury. Luella watched him, concern threading through her chest. "You should sit," she murmured. Cassian's eyes flicked to her, sharp, then soft. He sat. "I will heal, but until then, you must follow every instruction I give you." Luella nodded. "I will. Not because I command it, but because your safety depends on it." Luella's breath caught. His care was not gentle, but it was real. "I understand," she said. And she meant it. Something in Cassian eased, just slightly, just enough. Rian entered then, closing the door behind him. His expression was composed but urgent. "We have movement," he said. Cassian straightened. "Where?" "Dockside. Your brother's men are searching for someone injured, matching your description." Cassian's jaw tightened. Luella felt the air shift, the way the room seemed to sharpen. "They'll sweep outward, block by block," Rian continued. "It's only a matter of time before someone remembers seeing blood in the snow behind that cafe." Luella's chest tightened. Her old life, her job, her routines, her memories of her mother felt suddenly distant, unreachable. Cassian noticed the flicker of grief in her eyes. His hand, without thinking, rested lightly on hers. Not claiming, not demanding, just grounding. Rian watched the connection silently, reading more than either of them said. "We need to reinforce the district lines," Cassian instructed. "Double watches at all entry points. No one moves alone." Rian nodded. "What about her?" Cassian looked at Luella, truly looked. She wasn't fragile. She was frightened, yes, but strong enough to remain. Strong enough to stay. He turned to Rian. "She stays close to me." Rian didn't argue. He understood the meaning beneath the words. Luella was no longer just someone he owed. She was someone he was choosing to guard, someone he would kill for if necessary. Luella felt the weight of that truth settle inside her. Heavy, but not frightening, not anymore. Cassian led Luella through the estate later that day, showing her the spaces she could move safely, areas guarded, areas watched, areas that were hers to exist within. The library was her favorite. Warm lamplight, walls lined with old novels and leather-bound histories. A place of quiet in a world built on storms. She ran her fingers along the spines. "You read," she murmured. Cassian stood in the doorway, leaning lightly on the frame. "Every leader thinks they are feared because they are strong, but strength means nothing without understanding." Luella looked at him, and he continued, voice steady. "Knowledge is how you stay alive." She nodded slowly. "My mother used to say that books are how the lonely speak to each other across time." Cassian's eyes softened. not visibly, but enough that she felt it. Your mother was wise, he said. The warmth between them was quiet, gentle, a bridge forming plank by plank. But the moment shattered when a loud knock echoed through the hall. A guard opened the door and bowed his head. Boss, it's him. Cassian's expression didn't change, but something dark, controlled, ignited behind his eyes. Luella's breath caught. Who? Cassian looked at her. My brother's messenger. The room seemed to tilt. Stay behind me, he said, soft, unshakable. The fire flickered, the snow fell. The past walked through the door. The man who entered was thin, sharp-featured, dressed in a black coat dusted with snow. His eyes flicked around the room not with arrogance, but with contempt disguised as civility. Cassian stood tall despite his wound. Luella stayed just behind him, her heart pounding a steady drum rhythm in her ears. The messenger spoke with a voice smooth as polished glass. Your brother sends his greetings. Cassian didn't respond. The messenger smiled faintly. He says you should have stayed down in the snow. He says you should have known when your time was over. Luella felt Cassian's breath change, slow, controlled, lethal. Tell him, Cassian said, voice quiet, that I will see him soon. The messenger's eyes slid to Luella. He studied her with an insulting curiosity. So this is the girl. Cassian moved, not violently, not loudly, but with a single step that placed himself directly between them. The message was absolute. Do not look at her again. The messenger raised his hands as if amused. Your brother sends another message. He reached into his coat. Every guard tensed. But instead of a gun, he pulled out a single white lily, a funeral flower. He placed it on the table like a challenge, like a prophecy. He says you should start choosing who will mourn you. Cassian said nothing. Silence became a weapon. The messenger turned and left with quiet steps. When the door closed, Luella released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Cassian looked at the lily, the symbol of death, of betrayal, of endings. He didn't touch it. He simply said, voice low enough to shake the quiet air, it has begun. Luella knew then this was no refuge. This was a battlefield waiting to ignite, and she was no longer just a bystander. The lily remained on the dining table long after the messenger had gone. None of Cassian's people touched it. None dared. It lay there like a silent countdown, a threat written in petals instead of bullets. Luella found herself staring at it, the white too pure, too gentle for the violence it promised. Snow still drifted outside the tall windows, soft and quiet, the kind of snowfall that muffles sound, the kind that makes people believe the world has gone still. But inside the estate, tension coiled like wire pulled too tight. Cassian stood near the table, one hand braced on its edge, his breath slow and measured. His wound ached. His betrayal ached more. Luella approached him quietly, though every instinct inside her trembled, not from fear of him, but from the weight of what was coming. Will he really come for you? She whispered. Cassian's gaze didn't leave the flower. Not for me. His voice was low, controlled, for anyone I care about. Luella's breath caught. There it was, the truth she had felt but hadn't spoken. She stepped closer, fingers brushing the edge of the table. Then I'll stay where you can see me. Cassian turned then, eyes sharp as winter glass. I didn't save you, she said, before he could speak. I chose you. The room shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. Cassian's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something painfully close to emotion. He exhaled slowly, then understand what that choice means. He reached out, not to claim her, but to steady her. If we stand together, we stand against a man who will burn the world to break me. Luella nodded. There was no fear left in her voice, only truth. Then we don't let him. The estate moved like a living organism preparing for impact. Guards rotated positions with silent coordination. Phones were answered with one-word confirmations. Locks clicked. Shadows shifted. Everyone knew what the lily meant. Cassian's brother, Cassian Vale, was not the kind of man who sent warnings unless he was already moving his pieces into place. Ryan gathered Cassian and Luella in a strategy room deep inside the estate. Dark wood table, maps spread across it, markers showing territories controlled, routes monitored, names of trusted allies and known traitors. Cassian leaned on the table slightly, pain still threading through his ribs, though he hid it well. Ryan pointed to a location on the map near the industrial district. Axton has taken control of the east warehouses. He's building something there. Cassian's eyes narrowed. Supply lines. And manpower, Ryan added. He's recruiting fast. He's offering promises you never would. Cassian's jaw tightened. Because my promises are real. Ryan nodded. And harder. Cassian didn't deny it. He ran his fingers along the map, over the district he once controlled without question, the streets he grew up on, the territory he bled for. Luella watched him, not the Mafia boss, not the feared syndicate leader, but the man fighting not to lose everything he built. Cassian lifted his gaze to Ryan. He believes power is taken. He shook his head. Power is held. Ryan's eyes sharpened. Then it's time to remind him who you are. The room fell into steady silence. Plans weren't spoken. They didn't need to be. Cassian and Ryan had fought their entire lives in a world where saying less was the safest way to survive. Luella felt her heart pound, not with fear, but with the unmistakable awareness that she was now part of something larger than her small life. Later, when the house was quieter, guards in their rotations, preparations continuing, Luella found Cassian alone in the study. He sat in an armchair, firelight flickering against his face, casting his features in warm amber and sharp shadow. He looked tired, not weak, but worn, like a man who had carried too much for too long. Luella hesitated before stepping inside. Cassian looked up, and the tension in his shoulders eased by a subtle degree. There was no mask with her now. No armor. You should be resting, she said softly. He huffed a quiet, humorless breath. Resting is when thoughts are loudest. Luella crossed the room, moving slowly, giving him time to stop her if he wished. He didn't. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Tell me about him, your brother. For a moment, Cassian said nothing, just stared into the fire. Then quietly, Axton was the favorite. The words carried years of pain spoken in 3 syllables. He had charm, he had ambition. People were drawn to him. They wanted to believe in him. Cassian's gaze lowered, but he wanted everything without earning any of it. Luella listened, silent, open. Our father gave me the syndicate, Cassian continued. Not because I was stronger, but because I was loyal. He said the word like it still hurt. Axton couldn't stand it. He believed the world should bend for him. Luella's voice was soft, so he decided to take it. Cassian nodded once, slowly. He didn't just want power. He wanted me gone. He wanted to erase me. Luella leaned forward slightly. You survived. Cassian finally looked at her, really looked. Because I had to, not because I wanted to. And in that moment, Luella understood him more than anyone ever had. There was a long stretch of quiet, the kind that wasn't empty but full, of understanding, of grief, of something unspoken growing between them. Then softly, Cassian asked, "And your father?" Luella's breath hitched. She had shared pieces of her past, but not the wound beneath it. She looked down at her hands. My father was a good man, she began. He worked at a factory, came home tired, but he tried. Her voice thinned slightly. When my mother got sick, everything changed. The medical bills were too much. The worry. It ate at him. She swallowed. One night, he left to get fresh air. Her hands trembled. He didn't come back. Cassian didn't speak. He didn't offer apologies or platitudes. He just listened, with a depth that felt like safety. I used to wait by the window, she whispered, every night for weeks. A tear slid down her cheek, silent, unnoticed until it fell. Cassian stood slowly, walked to her and knelt in front of her chair. His wound pooled, but he didn't flinch. He reached up, not to wipe her tear, but to simply hold her hands in his. She looked at him, eyes wet, breath unsteady. Cassian's voice was low, honest. Some people leave because they choose to. His thumb brushed lightly along the back of her hand. But some people leave because they were drowning. Luella closed her eyes. A quiet sob escaped. Not loud, not broken, just real. In the firelight, in the quiet, in the space where two wounded lives touched, something inside both of them shifted. Not love, not yet, but something deeper. The beginning of love. The moment was interrupted by the ring of a phone, sharp and cold. Rian entered the study, expression unreadable but urgent. Cassian released Luella's hand slowly, stood with controlled effort. "What is it?" Cassian asked. Rian's voice was calm, but the air around him felt different, charged. Axton just sent another message. Cassian's jaw flexed. "This time," Rian continued quietly, "it's not a flower." He walked forward and placed a small object on the table. A cafe name badge. Luella's. The room fell still. Luella's chest constricted. She remembered leaving her coat behind in the rush. She remembered the blood, the snow. The night everything changed. Cassian stared at the badge, his expression unreadable, too controlled to hold the full storm building beneath the surface. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer soft, weary, or grieving. It was the voice of the man the city feared. "He has crossed the line." Rian nodded. "What are your orders?" Cassian's gaze lifted, dark, focused, unbreakable. "Prepare everything. We move tonight." Luella felt her pulse quicken, but not from fear alone. Cassian turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the truth. He was done surviving. He was going to fight. Not because of power, not because of pride, but because someone had threatened her. The war was no longer just between brothers. It was about protection, loyalty, and the quiet, undeniable beginning of love. The snow outside fell harder, thick and relentless. The city held its breath, and the first spark of war was lit.
Night fell like a curtain, heavy and absolute. The estate glowed with lamplight, but outside, the Vale district moved with silent purpose. Guards checked rooftops, alleys, entry points. Shadows crossed shadows. Weapons glinted under streetlights. Engines hummed low. The air tasted of winter and war. Cassian stood at the center of the estate's atrium, his breath controlled, his stance steady. He wore a dark wool coat now, tailored and sharp, every line of him composed, despite the healing wound beneath the fabric. He looked like a king preparing for battle, not loud, not cruel, but unshakably certain. Ryan spoke beside him, offering updates, timing, routes, manpower counts. But Cassian wasn't fully listening. His eyes were fixed on the second-floor railing, where Luella stood watching him. She wore the same wool coat she always had, but something about her posture had changed. She didn't cling to the shadows anymore. She stood in the open, not foolishly, but bravely. When their eyes met, silence closed around them, thick, electric. Cassian walked toward her, every step slow, deliberate. When he reached her, He didn't ask her to stay behind. He didn't tell her to hide. He simply asked, voice soft, low, "Are you afraid?" Luella swallowed. She could lie. She could pretend bravery was easy, but honesty was the only language they shared. "Yes," she whispered. Cassian nodded once, not in disappointment, but in acceptance. "Good," he murmured. "Only fools walk into war without fear." His hand lifted, not to touch her, but to hover near her cheek, a breath away from contact. "Stay near me tonight, not because you are weak, but because you matter." Her chest tightened, not in fear, in something dangerously close to love. The convoy moved out in silence. 3 black cars, headlights off, engines soft as heartbeat. The city was quiet, snow blanketing the streets, lamp pulse flickering in the cold night air. Luella sat beside Cassian in the back seat, not because she belonged there, but because he wanted her there. Ryan sat in the passenger seat, eye scanning, mind calculating. The car drove across frozen bridges and winding streets until the city grew harsher. Warehouse districts, old train lines, metal fences lined with frost. They were heading toward the industrial warehouses Axton had claimed, and as they drove, Cassian finally spoke. Not strategy, not orders, something far heavier. "The first time I held a gun," he said quietly, "I was 10. Luella turned to him slowly. His gaze remained on the window, on the blur of streetlights. "My father placed it in my hand and said, 'If you are going to lead, you must know what it costs.'" Cassian's voice was calm, but beneath it lived the echo of a child forced to grow teeth before he had a chance to grow wings. "I didn't want this life," he continued, "but I take responsibility for it." He looked at nothing and everything. Axton wanted the power. He just didn't want the cost. Luella listened, not to the Mafia boss, but to the boy inside the man. "Cassian," she whispered, "you didn't choose what made you, but you choose what you do now." That made him turn, slowly, fully. His eyes didn't just see her, they recognized her. The car slowed. The world outside shifted. They were close. Cassian's jaw set. His voice returned to iron. "Stay behind me at all times." Luella nodded. She would not leave him. Not now. Not ever. The warehouse loomed like a sleeping giant. Dark steel walls, frost-lined windows, floodlights casting long shadows across the snow. The air tasted metallic, sharp with cold and danger. Cassian stepped out first, coat billowing lightly in the winter wind. Ryan followed, signaling the others into formation. Luella stepped last, her breath shivering into the night. The ground crunched beneath her boots. Cassian placed a hand briefly at her back, not pushing, just anchoring. Then the warehouse door creaked open. 2 figures stepped out, armed, stone-faced, but clearly waiting. Not guards, not ambush, a message. And then Axton appeared. Lean, elegant, a smile like a blade. The resemblance to Cassian was unmistakable. Same jawline, same dark eyes, but where Cassian's eyes held depth, Axton's held hunger. "Brother," Axton drawled, spreading his arms as if greeting an old friend. Cassian didn't speak. Silence could be a weapon. Axton's gaze slid to Luella. His smiles slipped sharper. "So this is the girl, the little lamb who dragged the wolf back from death." Luella's heartbeat stumbled, but she did not step back. Cassian moved slightly forward, blocking her from Axton's view. The gesture was small. The meaning was absolute. Axton laughed softly. "Still protecting strays, I see." His voice was silt dipped in venom. "Tell me, brother, how many will die because you couldn't let her freeze in the snow?"
Cassian finally spoke. Calm, cold, lethal. Enough. Axton's smile faded. The wind stilled. The night held its breath. The line between them was drawn, not in words, in blood yet to be spilled. Axton took a slow step forward. You were always the same, Cassian. Strong enough to win, weak enough to care. His eyes flashed with something feral. And that is why I will take everything from you. Luella felt Cassian's breath shift. No visible movement, no dramatic reaction, but something inside him locked. Ryan's hand hovered near his holster, but Cassian didn't give the signal. Instead, Cassian spoke quietly, too quiet. When you tried to kill me, you should have aimed for my heart. Axton's expression flickered, just for a moment. Then, gunfire shattered the night. It came from above, sniper position. Cassian reacted instantly, grabbing Luella and pulling her to cutter behind a steel column as bullets sliced through the air. Ryan and the guards returned fire with precise, efficient bursts. The warehouse yard erupted into chaos, shouts, ricochets, snow exploding into white smoke plumes. Luella's hand shook, but she stayed low, exactly where Cassian kept her. Cassian pressed his back to the column, one hand bracing the wound that reopened under strain. His breath was sharp, but his eyes were clear, calculating, alive with the cold fire of war. He checked the angle of the shots, the echo pattern, the rhythm. Second roof, he said to Ryan, who was already adjusting position. Bullets tore through the night, metal screaming, sparks scattering. Axton vanished into the warehouse like smoke. Cassian exhaled hard, then turned to Luella. Their faces were inches apart. Snow caught in her lashes. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. He lifted a hand, gently, brushing a stray flake from her cheek. The touch was soft, dangerous in its tenderness. You did well, he murmured. Luella didn't feel brave, but his words made her feel steady. Her voice was quiet, but it did not break. This won't stop, will it? Cassian had it once, not in disappointment, but in acceptance. Not until one of us ends it. Luella's heart ached, for him, for the child who was forced to become this, for the man now carrying the war he never asked for. She stepped closer, close enough to be seen, to be understood. Then I stand with you, she said. Cassian's breath caught, not visibly, but she felt it. His hand stayed on her cheek for a heartbeat longer. Fire and frost, war and tenderness. A love beginning in the darkest place. Ryan looked away, not out of discomfort, but respect. Cassian lowered his hand. His voice was quiet, final. Then everything changes now. Snow drifted softly around them, like the world itself was witnessing. The first battle had ended. The real war had begun. And love was no longer a possibility. It was the reason.
The ride back to the estate was silent. Not the uneasy silence of fear, but the heavy silence of realization. Snow blew sideways across the city streets, brushing against windows like restless ghosts. Luella sat beside Cassian, her heartbeat finally slowing, but her mind replayed the chaos. Bullets cracking through the air, the scream of metal, Cassian pulling her behind him with the same instinct one uses to shield something precious. She should have been terrified still, but instead she felt a strange clarity, like the world had sharpened and simplified. Danger was no longer something distant or abstract. It was real. It had a face. It had a name. And it would come again. Cassian's breathing was tight, each inhale a careful effort. His wound had opened during the fight. Dark crimson now stained his coat, but he kept his posture straight, jaw set, gaze fixed out the window, as though the city itself were an opponent he needed to memorize. Luella watched him, the steady strength, the unbreakable composure, but she also saw the pain beneath it, the vulnerability no one else was allowed to see. Without thinking, she reached over and took his hand. His fingers were cold. His body tensed, not in rejection, but in surprise. No one touched him without fear. No one reached for him without agenda. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. Cassian didn't look at her, but he didn't pull away. He let her hand rest in his, quiet, grounding. The snow outside softened into a slow drift, like the world had exhaled. And in that silence, something wordless passed between them, not spoken, not named, but real. Back inside the estate, the halls buzzed with low controlled activity, guards shifting positions, radios exchanging brief coded messages, weapons checked and counted. Luella followed Cassian upstairs, but the moment they were away from others, his steps faltered. He caught himself on the banister, breath fracturing. Cassian, she moved to support him, but he steadied himself with stubborn pride. Still, his face was pale, the wound tugged, the adrenaline had faded, pain had returned. This time, he allowed her to guide him to his room. The space was simple, dark wood, gray sheets, the faint scent of cedar and smoke. No indulgence, no excess. A room built for someone who lived in discipline. Luella helped him sit on the edge of the bed. She knelt before him, hands gentle but sure, as she worked to loosen his coat and check the bandage beneath. Blood bloomed through it. Too much. "You should have let Rian take your place," she whispered. Cassian's eyes met hers, sharp, steady. A leader does not send others where he will not go. She swallowed. "And what if it kills you?" His jaw tightened. "Then I die standing, not hiding." A quiet tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of understanding. She cleaned the wound again, her fingers steady, movements careful. Cassian watched her, every breath, every shift of emotion across her face. At last, he spoke, so softly she nearly missed it. "When you touched my hand, in the car." Luella looked up. His voice was low, raw. "No one has touched me like that in years." Her heart ached, not out of sympathy, but of recognition. Two lonely souls trying to remember how to be held. She finished rewrapping the bandage, her hands lingering for a moment, not because she needed to, but because a part of her couldn't bear to let go just yet. Cassian's breathing had steadied, the worst of the pain easing, but his gaze did not move from hers. The room was quiet except for the low hum of winter wind against the windows and the soft crackle of a distant hearth. Luella sat on the floor beside his knees, exhaustion settling into her bones, but she didn't move away. Cassian lifted his hand, slowly, deliberately, and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His fingers were warm now, the touch gentle, vulnerable. "Luella," he murmured, her name spoken like something sacred. She looked up, breath caught in her throat. There was no stage to this moment, no performance, no roles, just two people who had seen each other's wounds and didn't flinch. Cassian said softly, "You should rest." But neither of them moved, neither wanted the moment to end. Luella leaned forward just slightly, enough for her forehead to rest against his knee. Not romantic, not desperate, just true. Cassian's hand moved to her hair, fingers threading through softly. He let out a slow breath, one that sounded like something long buried finally loosening. The world outside was hard, cold, merciless. But here, in this tiny pocket of stillness, they were allowed to be human, allowed to not be strong, allowed to exist without war. For the first time in years, Cassian Vale closed his eyes, not in defense, not in strategy, but in peace. When Luella finally rose, she helped him lie back, adjusting the pillows to ease pressure from his wound. His breath trembled once before evening out.
But when she turned to leave, his hand caught her wrist, not tightly, just enough to ask without words, "Don't go." Luella sat beside him on the edge of the bed. Cassian looked up at her in the dim light, eyes darker than the night outside, but softer than she had ever seen them. "Why didn't you run?" he asked, quiet, like a question meant only for the dark. She answered with no hesitation, "Because I know what it feels like to be left." The silence that followed was not empty, it was full of grief, of understanding, of something blooming slowly like dawn. Cassian lifted her hand and pressed it not to his lips, but over his heartbeat. Steady, strong, human. "Then I will not leave you," he said. Not poetic, not dramatic, just truth. And in his world, truth was rarer than diamonds. Luella's eyes burned not with tears, but with something fierce and tender all at once. She leaned down, slowly, her forehead touching his. His breath mingled with hers. Too close, too real, the kind of closeness that doesn't ask permission because it already has been given. Cassian's voice was barely a whisper. "Luella." Her name sounded like a promise. She could have kissed him. He would have let her. But instead, she stayed. Close, connected, safe. Sometimes love begins not with fire, but with quiet. Cassian drifted into sleep, not the shallow, defensive sleep of a hunted man, but something deeper, something earned. Luella sat beside him until his breathing steadied, until the shadows no longer held fear. When she finally left the room, she found Rian waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall, arms folded. He had seen enough to understand, but his expression held no judgment. Just one question. "Are you prepared," he asked, softly, "for what loving him costs?" Luella didn't look away. "I'm not here because I chose a fair life. I'm here because I chose his." Rian exhaled slowly, something like respect in the sound. "Then understand this. If Cassian loves you, the war stops being about power." He looked toward the door she had just left. His voice lowered. "It becomes personal." Luella nodded. "I know." Rian gave a single solemn nod. "Then we protect him." Their eyes met. Not allies, not acquaintances, but two people holding up the same person in different ways. Rian stepped aside, letting her pass. Luella walked down the hallway slowly, snow tapping softly against the windows. The estate felt different now. Not just a fortress, not just a refuge. It felt like the beginning of something irreversible. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, Cassian Vale smiled. Because war was no longer strategy, it was love. And love was the most dangerous battleground of all. The storm hit the city before dawn, snow whipping sideways in fierce, howling gusts that rattled windows and bent lampposts. The Vale estate sat silent beneath the storm's fury, guarded, watchful. Inside, hallways were dim, shadows long, the air thick with anticipation. Something in the night charged the atmosphere, like the earth itself was bracing. Luella woke with a jolt, breath sharp, not from a nightmare, not from noise, but from a feeling, a sense. The kind you don't learn, you inherit. She slipped from her room, feet quiet on the wooden floor. The estate seemed different in the dark, every turn familiar but edged in tension. She found herself drawn to the study, where a faint light flickered beneath the door. Cassian was inside, standing before the tall windows, one hand braced on the glass, shirt half open, bandage visible beneath. Snow blew in furious spirals outside, but his stillness was absolute. Luella stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. He didn't turn, but he knew she was there. "I can feel it," he murmured. His voice was quiet, but not uncertain. "He's coming." Luella's pulse quickened.
Not from fear of Axton, but fear of losing Cassian. She walked to him slowly, placing a hand against his back, feeling the tension in his muscles, the restrained fire beneath his calm. Cassian finally turned to face her. His eyes were darker than night, but the storm outside reflected inside them, wild, unyielding. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, voice steady, "you stay with Rian. You do not come after me." Luella shook her head instantly. "No." Cassian's jaw tightened. "Luella," she interrupted, voice trembling but unshakably firm. "I did not choose to stay alive. I chose you." The storm howled. Cassian exhaled, not in frustration, in surrender. Rian entered moments later, coat dusted with frost, expression sharp. Perimeter triple arms triggered on the north side. No visuals yet, they're using the storm as cover. Cassian nodded once. No panic, no hesitation. The transformation was instant. The man in pain, the man grieving his brother's betrayal, the man learning how to feel again, vanished. The leader returned, cold, tactical, unbreakable. "Lock down the east and west corridors. Everyone to defense positions," Cassian ordered. Rian relayed commands calmly into his earpiece. Voices responded across multiple channels. Luella watched it unfold. The quiet efficiency, the unspoken trust between Cassian and his people. War was not loud here. War was prepared. Cassian reached for his gun, but Luella stepped forward, placing a hand over his. Not to stop him, to ground him. Their eyes locked. Cassian didn't need words. Luella didn't ask for promises. This was not the moment for love spoken aloud. This was the moment for courage. Cassian lifted her hand and pressed it once, to his chest, over his heart. Then he released her and stepped into the hall, voice carrying through the estate like a steady drumbeat leading an army. Luella stayed close behind him, not clinging, but present. Rian met her eyes briefly. "I'll keep him alive," he said. She nodded, but Rian didn't understand. Luella wasn't afraid of Cassian dying. She was afraid of what losing her would do to him. The first explosion hit the south wall. Light tore through the storm, followed by a shuddering blast that rattled the foundation. Guards rushed into motion, the estate coming alive like a fortress waking up. Snow and smoke swirled in the wind as figures in dark tactical coats flooded through the breach. Trained, coordinated, hand-picked by Axton himself. Cassian moved with lethal grace, every step precise, every shot controlled. Rian fought beside him, a shadow to his right, silent and deadly. Luella stayed back, just as she promised, but she watched. She saw the difference between Cassian's people and his brothers. Cassian's moved like a family, protective, disciplined, exact. Axton's moved like a pack of wolves driven by hunger. The estate's hallways filled with the echo of gunfire, the hiss of radio calls, the sharp scent of gunpowder. Yet even in chaos, Cassian was unmistakable, calm in the storm, commanding not with fear, but with presence. Then she saw him, Axton, standing in the courtyard, coats billowing in the snowstorm, expression unreadable. He didn't rush into battle. He didn't fight. He watched, waiting, for Cassian. For the moment they would face each other without walls, without armies, without anything in between. Cassian saw him too. A stillness cut through the battle, a line drawn, brother against brother, past against present, love against resentment. And Luella understood in that instant, this fight was never about power. It was about who Cassian was allowed to become. Cassian stepped forward into the courtyard, snow swirling around him like white fire. Axton smiled, slow, cruel, triumphant. "You came back from the dead. Disappointing. I liked you better buried."
Cassian didn't speak. Words didn't matter here. Axton spread his arms. Look at what I built in your absence. Men who follow without question. Streets that bend to my will. Cassian's voice was low, even. Men who follow fear are not loyal. They are temporary. Axton's smile twitched. The storm howled louder. The estate lights flickered. Snowflakes burned in the air like sparks. You always thought you were better than me, Axton breathed. No, Cassian said softly. I always hoped you would become something better than this. Axton's expression cracked. Anger, grief, jealousy, all twisted into something monstrous. Then let's end this, he hissed. He drew his gun. Cassian drew his. The world held its breath. Luella felt her chest tighten, so hard she couldn't breathe. Rian's hand went to her shoulder to steady her, but she couldn't look away. 2 brothers, 2 lives, one final inevitability. The sound of the first gunshot shattered the world. Chaos erupted again. Rian moved. Guards surged. Snow turned red. Cassian and Axton fought with a violence born not of hatred, but of heartbreak. Years of betrayal, love twisted into rivalry, wounds never spoken. Each gunshot was a memory, each step a scar. Luella tried to stay back. She tried to obey. But when she saw Axton adjust his aim, not at Cassian, but at her, her body moved before thought existed. She stepped into view. Cassian saw. Time slowed. His voice tore from him, not a command, not a warning, but a sound of pure human terror. Luella! Axton fired. Cassian moved. The bullet struck him. His body jerked back, collapsing into the snow, his blood stark against white. Luella screamed, raw, breaking, primal, as she ran to him, falling to her knees beside his body. Cassian's eyes flickered. Pain, fear, and something deeper. No, not now, not her. His fingers reached for her cheek, trembling. She caught his hand, held it against her face, tears falling freely. Cassian, Cassian, stay with me. He breathed her name like a final prayer. Luella. The storm roared. Gunfire raged. The world broke open, and love, the kind that could change everything, fought to stay alive in the snow.
Snow swallowed sound. The courtyard was chaos. Shouting voices, boots crashing through drifts, gunfire echoing off stone. But for Luella, the world had narrowed to one thing: Cassian. Bleeding into the snow, his breath uneven, his skin too pale beneath the winter night. She knelt in the freezing slush, her hands already slick with his blood, her heart pounding so violently it hurt. Cassian, Cassian, look at me. Don't close your eyes. His lashes fluttered, breath catching like something inside him was splintering. Rian slid down beside them, voice urgent, sharp. We need to move him now. Luella didn't look up, couldn't. Her entire body was focused on keeping Cassian tethered to this world. Stay with me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm here. I'm right here. Cassian's hand twitched weakly in the snow, reaching for her. She immediately took it, holding it against her chest. Axton was being pushed back by the guards, retreating into the storm, disappearing into the night like a shadow dissolving. But Luella didn't care. The war could have burned the sky red, and she still would have been right here. Cassian's gaze tried to find hers. His breaths were shallow, uneven. Luella. Her tears fell onto his cheek. Don't say my name like that. Not like goodbye. He blinked slowly, pain flickering across his eyes. Rian's voice cut through, firm. We move. Now. The guards lifted Cassian carefully, Luella staying pressed at his side, refusing to lose contact even for a moment. As they carried him through the estate doors, blood marking a trail behind them like a cruel path of fate, Luella whispered again and again, shaking, desperate. You don't leave me. You hear me? You don't get to leave. The infirmary inside the estate had once been a wine cellar, stone walls now lined with surgical shelves and medical equipment. The lights were bright, harsh, too clean. Luella stood at the bedside while Rian and two trained medics worked with swift precision, cutting away fabric, cleaning the wound, preparing transfusion lines. Cassian was unconscious now, too still, too quiet. His chest rose, but faintly. Luella's hand shook uncontrollably. She tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, like she was drowning above the surface. Rian moved to her side for a moment, placing a firm hand on her arm, not to comfort, but to anchor. He is strong, Rian said. I have seen him survive worse than what would kill ordinary men. Luella swallowed, her voice a raw whisper. But surviving isn't the same as living. Rian didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew. He had seen Cassian walk through life like a man dragging chains behind him. The medic's voice broke through the silence. Bullet passed between ribs, missed the heart by less than a finger's width. Luella's knees buckled. She caught the edge of the metal table to stay upright. We can save him, the medic continued, but his body is already weakened from the previous wound. He needs blood, rest, and time. Rian nodded sharply. He'll have all three. Luella stepped closer to Cassian's side. His skin was cold, too cold. She took his hand again, lifting it gently against her cheek like a vow carved into flesh. You are not allowed to die. Do you hear me? I didn't pull you from the snow just to lose you in the light. Her tears dripped on his knuckles, but she didn't sob. She didn't break. She held him. Because that is what people who choose each other do. Hours passed. The medic stitched muscle, sealed bleeding vessels, restructured damaged tissue. Luella never left the bedside, not even when her legs ached, not even when her fingers went numb, not even when the storm outside quieted into an eerie calm. She remembered her mother's voice, soft and warm in memory. Stay with them. Healing is not just the body. Someone has to stay. So she stayed, her hand never leaving his. At some point, the exhaustion caught up to her. She rested her forehead against Cassian's arm, her eyes heavy but refusing to close. Rian returned with fresh bandages, blankets, even warm tea she didn't drink. He watched her in the dim lamplight. You love him, he said, not as a question. Luella didn't look up. I don't know what to call it, but when I look at him, something in me recognizes something in him, like we were made from the same break. Rian was silent for a long time. Then he spoke quietly. Cassian has never allowed himself to love, not because he can't, but because he believed love made him weak. Luella's fingers tightened around Cassian's hand. Love doesn't make us weak. Love is what makes the fight worth surviving. Rian exhaled, a sound like the first crack in the armor of a man who was carried too much. Then he chose correctly. Luella finally looked up at him. Their grief, their hope, their fear reflected in each other. Rian stepped back, giving her space. Cassian's heartbeat monitor beeped, steady, slow, but there. Luella leaned close, her lips near his ear. You stay. Do you understand? Stay.
With me. The smallest twitch of his fingers answered. He heard her.
When dawn finally came, the storm had passed. The city outside lay buried in a thick blanket of fresh snow, silent and untouched. But inside the estate, war was still alive, pulsing through its walls. Guards patrolled in constant rotation. Weapons were checked. Messages were intercepted. Axton was still out there. And now, Cassian was vulnerable. Luella refused to leave the bedside. She watched every breath, every faint change in the rise and fall of his chest. At one point, exhaustion won, and she drifted into a light sleep, head resting beside his hand. She dreamed of snow stained red, of lilies falling into fire, of a voice calling her name through darkness. When she woke, Cassian's fingers were curled weakly in her hair. Her breath caught. She lifted her head. His eyes were half open, sluggish with pain, but aware, alive. "Luella," he whispered, hoarse, broken, real. Her hand flew to his cheek, relief overwhelming her body so quickly she nearly sobbed. "I'm here," she breathed. "I'm here." Cassian's eyes flickered with confusion until he felt the bandages, the pain, the weight of what happened. His voice cracked. "You stepped in front of him." Luella shook her head, tears falling now, not of fear, but of release. "No," she whispered. "You stepped in front of me." Cassian's breath hitched. Pain, emotion, something raw enough to tear. He tried to sit up. She stopped him gently, palms against his chest. "No, rest, stay." Cassian breathed her in, like she was air, like she was life. His eyes burned, not with weakness, but with love he didn't know how to name. She sat beside him on the bed. The room was quiet. The war outside paused only for this moment. Cassian turned his head slightly to look at her. Really look. No masks left, no armor, just a man who had fought the world alone for too long. "You could have died," he whispered. Luella nodded. "So could you." The truth hung between them, heavy, intimate. Cassian's voice trembled, not with fear, but with something so deeply human it hurt to hear. "I have survived bullets, betrayal, and losing everything I built." His eyes locked onto hers. "But the thought of losing you?" His breath broke. "That is the first thing that has ever truly terrified me." Luella's heart shattered, not into pain, but into something that felt like belonging. She leaned forward, slowly, carefully, and pressed her forehead to his. Their breaths tangled, their hands intertwined. No grand declarations, no dramatic speeches, just truth. Two broken souls choosing each other in a world designed to tear them apart. Cassian whispered her name again, like prayer, like surrender, like beginning. "Luella." I closed my eyes. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not a promise, a fact." Outside, the snow glowed like a new world. Inside, Cassian Vale opened his heart to someone for the first time in his life. And love, quiet, fierce, and unstoppable, became the reason he would live.
Cassian spent the next 2 days recovering in a quiet room lit by soft morning light. The world outside never paused. Guards changed shifts. Radios whispered coded messages. Maps were redrawn. But inside this room, time moved slower. Luella barely left his side. She learned the rhythm of his breathing, the slightest change in his expression, the way he woke from sleep with his hand half reaching for a weapon before he remembered she was there. Sometimes she read aloud, her voice soft and steady, stories her mother once loved. Sometimes she simply sat, fingers intertwined with his, letting silence speak for them. Cassian healed, not just in body, but in the quiet spaces where grief had lived too long. He watched Luella move, gentle, patient, stubborn, and wondered how a world that had taken so much from him had given her. One afternoon, snow dusted the window in soft patterns as Luella replaced his bandage. Her touch was careful but confident, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. Cassian watched her, eyes steady. "You carry pain quietly," he said. Luella paused, looking up. "And you carry it loudly," she replied softly, "even when you don't say a word." A faint, tired smile touched his lips. Not amusement, recognition. She sat beside him on the edge of the bed, their shoulders almost touching. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of the war, not of his world. I'm afraid of losing you, of finding something true only to have it taken away." Cassian reached out, fingers brushing her jaw, gentle as falling snow. "I fear the same." Their foreheads touched. No vows, no promises, but something unspoken was sealed between them. Not just love, loyalty. By the third day, Cassian was strong enough to walk without collapsing. The wound still burned, but he refused to let weakness linger longer than necessary. Rian watched with silent approval, the kind that came not from admiration, but from relief. Cassian was needed. The Vale district was holding, but only because of the loyalty he had built through years of fairness, discipline, and quiet strength. Axton had fire, but Cassian had foundation. In the strategy room, snowlight filtering through tall windows, Cassian stood over a large map. Rian marked recent attacks and sightings with dark ink. "He's tightening the circle," Rian said, forcing a confrontation. Cassian nodded, his gaze steady. "He wants me desperate, impulsive, reckless." "Are you?" Rian asked. Cassian shook his head. "No, I'm clear." Luella stood beside Cassian, not behind him. Her hand rested lightly on the table, eyes scanning the map. "He doesn't want your territory," she said quietly. "He wants your identity. He wants to erase who you are." Both men turned toward her, not dismissively, not surprised, attentive. "Which means," she continued, "he won't stop until he sees you break." Cassian exhaled slowly. "Then I break him first." But Luella shook her head, not with fear, not with hate. Her voice was steady, clear, with truth. Rian's eyebrow lifted. "Truth doesn't win wars." Luella's gaze didn't waver. "No, but it wins loyalty." Cassian stared at her, then looked back at the map. And for the first time, the strategy shifted. Cassian summoned his top lieutenants that evening, the study filled with weathered faces, sharp minds, and unwavering loyalty. These were people who had followed Cassian not because he demanded devotion, but because he had earned it. Cassian stood slowly, posture firm despite the healing wound. His voice carried through the room, not loud, not angry, but powerful with certainty. "My brother fights for control, but we fight for something he cannot understand." The room was silent, hanging on the meaning behind his words. Cassian's gaze did not waver. "We fight for each other, for every life under this district's roof, for every child who sleeps safely because of us, for every family who does not have to kneel to cruelty." No theatrics, no fear, just truth. Axton believes loyalty is bought with fear, but loyalty is built with honor. Heads nodded, breath steadied. Something in the room strengthened. Then Cassian spoke the words no one expected. "We do not attack first." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Rian studied Cassian closely, but he understood. Luella stood quiet, close, her presence a steady flame. Cassian continued, voice calm. "We hold, we protect, we let Axton come to us. And when he does," his eyes hardened, "we end this."
It wasn't retreat. It was the decision of a king. Later, when the room had emptied and plans had begun to move, Cassie and Luella walked slowly through the courtyard, snow crunching beneath their feet. The night sky glowed faintly with the city's reflection, bruised purple and silver. Cassian's steps were steady, but the cold made his wound ache. Luella noticed. She always noticed. "You should be resting," she murmured. Cassian gave a quiet exhale, not quite a laugh. "I rest when you tell me stories." Luella smiled softly. "You listen?" "Always," he said. The sincerity in his voice slowed her steps. They reached the center of the courtyard where the snow lay untouched. Cassian stopped. Luella turned to him. His gaze held hers, deep, steady, unguarded. "Before this ends," Cassian said quietly, "I need to know something." Her breath caught. "Anything." His voice softened, not with weakness, but with something brave. "When this war is done, when blood has settled, will you still choose me?" Luella stepped forward until there was no air between them. Her hand rested over his heart. "Cassian," she whispered, voice trembling with truth, "I didn't fall in love with the war." A pause, a breath, a heartbeat, and Cassian's expression broke. Quiet, raw, real. He leaned his forehead against hers. Their breath mingled in the cold. And for the first time in his life, Cassian Vale allowed himself to feel joy. The moment was gentle, too gentle, because in the shadows of the courtyard, unseen, silent, a figure watched. A gloved hand rested against a brick wall, a breath ghosted into the cold air, eyes gleamed with something sharp and hungry. Axton had not retreated to plan. He had retreated to observe, to learn, to strike where it would break the hardest. His voice whispered to the wind, quiet, poisonous. "Love. So that's the weakness." He stepped back into the dark, disappearing into the snowstorm that had begun to fall again. The flakes drifted softly around him, gentle, beautiful. But the storm coming would not be gentle, and it would not be beautiful. Because now the war was not just about power, it was about love. And love, when threatened, becomes unstoppable. The final confrontation was no longer approaching. It was inevitable, and closer than any of them realized.
Winter morning light spilled into the estate like a quiet sigh. The courtyard glistened with fresh snow, untouched from the night before. But inside, the atmosphere was different, heavier, sharper. Everyone felt it, the invisible pressure of a storm waiting to break. Luella spent the morning in the library, reading while Cassian rested. She kept one ear open, always, for footsteps or raised voices. She wasn't fragile anymore, not the girl who simply reacted to danger. She paid attention, learned, watched. The estate was her home now, and the people here were no longer strangers. Mara, the stern woman she had seen at breakfast days earlier, approached her quietly, carrying a tray of tea. She was older, with eyes that had seen too many winters and survived all of them. "You care for him," Mara said, not accusatory, simply observant. Luella nodded. Yes. Mara placed the tray down and sat across from her. "Cassian Vale is the kind of man who carries the weight of everyone he loves. He will bleed before he lets another suffer." Luella lowered her gaze. "I know." "Then understand what that means," Mara said gently. "The moment he realizes he loves you, truly, he will become reckless." Luella looked up, breath unsteady. "He already is." Mara nodded. "Then the question is not whether he can protect you." Her voice softened. "It's whether you can protect him." Luella froze, not because she didn't want to, but because she had never been asked to protect anyone before. She had only ever been the one left behind, but now she had a purpose, a person, a place in the world, and she would not lose it. Cassian awoke just before noon. His color was better, his posture steadier, but his breathing still carried pain. Luella was there, as always, by his side before he asked, before he could even think to reach for her. His eyes softened when he saw her. "You haven't slept," he said quietly. She gave a small smile. "Neither have you." He huffed a faint breath, something like a laugh, something like surrender. She helped him sit up, her hands gentle but confident. There was no hesitation now, no fear of touching him, of being close. Cassian watched her as she worked, really watched. "Ryan's told me what you said," he murmured. Luella looked up. "About love not making us weak?" Her cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. Cassian reached up, fingers brushing her cheek, slow and intentional. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." Luella's heartbeat stuttered, not from surprise, but because she believed him. He spoke no flattery, only truth. She rested her forehead against his, the moment soft, grounding, full. But the moment shattered when Ryan burst into the doorway, breath sharp, expression grave. "We have a problem." Cassian shifted instantly, pain forgotten, calm reasserting itself like armor. "What happened?" Ryan's jaw tightened. The district's west checkpoint didn't report rotation at dawn. Cassian stilled. Luella's breath stopped. Either they're compromised or they're already gone. Silence. Heavy. Final. Cassian stood, slow but steady. "We hold the north and east. Seal the south. Prepare the courtyard." Ryan nodded once and vanished down the hall. Luella followed Cassian, but Cassian stopped suddenly, turned to her, eyes searching hers. "Stay in the library," he said. Luella shook her head. "No." Cassian's voice hardened, not unkind, but final. "Stay here." He walked away. She watched him go, and for the first time, she did not obey. She moved through the estate with purpose, not recklessness. She knew where the storage rooms were, where the weapons were kept, where the guards stationed their supplies. She had learned quietly, watching, listening. Cassian protected her by building walls around her. But love didn't survive inside walls. It survived in partnership. She opened a drawer in the armory and wrapped her hand around the grip of a small handgun, not heavy, not large, but enough to defend herself. Mara found her there, not surprised, not alarmed, just steady. "You've made your choice," Mara said. Luella nodded. "If I stand behind him while he bleeds for me, then I am not his equal, I am his burden." Mara's eyes warmed, faint but real. "Then fight beside him." They moved together through the corridor. The estate had gone quiet, too quiet. Guards had shifted to outer positions. The halls felt empty, still, as if holding their breath. When they reached the courtyard, they stopped. Cassian stood near the steps, coat dark against the snow, posture steady, eyes alert. He was waiting for the enemy, for his brother, for the end of something, or the beginning of something else. Luella stepped forward. Cassian turned. Their eyes locked. He saw the gun in her hand. He understood instantly. His breath left him, not in anger, not in fear, but in awe. "You should have stayed inside," he said low. Luella stepped closer. "You told me fear means I understand what matters." The wind tugged at her hair. Snow danced between them. "I understand," she whispered. Cassian closed his eyes, just for a heartbeat. When he opened them, something new lived there. Not just love, not just devotion, respect.
Ryan joined them. The guards formed into strategic formation. The snow continued to fall, silent, soft, almost gentle, and then, like a breath held too long finally released, the gates creaked open, slowly, deliberately. Axton stepped through first. No gun, no army, just him, a lone silhouette in the snowfall. Cassian stepped forward, not with violence, not with fury, but with finality. The two brothers stood feet apart, two lives carved by the same childhood, split by different wounds. Axton smiled, tired, worn, fraying at the edges. "You survived." Cassian did not respond. "You were always hard to kill, even when you should have stayed dead." Cassian's voice was calm, quiet, almost sad. "You didn't come to finish this with guns." Axton's jaw tightened. "No." Snow swirled. "I came to offer you a choice." Luella's chest tightened. Cassian remained still. "Walk away," Axton said. "Leave the city, leave the power, leave the name." "And she lives." The world stopped. Cassian did not flinch. "Or," Axton continued, voice cracking like ice under weight, "stay, fight, win." He looked at Luella. "And I will kill her slowly." The courtyard fell silent. Cassian's breath did not change, but something inside him did. A shift. A quiet, lethal resolve. "You misunderstand," Cassian said softly. "I don't choose between her and my throne." He stepped forward. "I choose her. And because I choose her, I will end you." Axton's face changed. Not just anger now, something deeper, something wounded. "You were always the favored one. You always got chosen. I was chosen because I stayed, because I fought for others, because I bled for them." His gaze sharpened. "You only ever fought for yourself." Axton's hand twitched, gripping something inside his coat. Luella saw it. She moved first. Axton drew, but Luella fired. The shot rang through the courtyard, sharp, echoing, final. Axton froze. His pistol slipped from his hand and fell into the snow. Blood spread slowly across his coat, dark, blooming like a red flower. He staggered. Cassian caught him before he hit the ground, not as an enemy, as a brother. Axton's breath trembled. His voice cracked. "It should have been me." Cassian's voice broke, not loud, but with decades of love and regret. "It was you. I wanted it to be you." Axton's eyes filled with tears he was too proud to shed. And then he was gone. The snow fell. The courtyard held its breath. Cassian kneeled in the snow, his brother in his arms, breathing like a man who had finally reached the end of a war that began long before either of them understood it. Luella stepped forward, hands shaking, but she didn't cry. She placed her hand gently on Cassian's back, and Cassian leaned into her touch. The snow did not stop falling. It covered the courtyard, the rooftops, the silent city beyond. It covered Axton's body where it lay wrapped in a dark shroud. The world felt muted, as though grief itself had settled over the Vale district like frost. Cassian stood in the courtyard long after the others had gone inside. Luella stayed beside him, not touching, not speaking, simply present. The cold stung her skin, but she didn't move. Cassian's jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid, his eyes fixed on the snow. He had survived gunfire, betrayal, and the weight of power. But this wound was different. This was grief that didn't spill blood. This grief bled inward. He was not always like this.
Cassian said, quietly, voice rough. Luella turned her head gently. No one is born cruel. Cassian exhaled slowly, a breath heavy with memory. When we were young, we used to run along the riverbank behind the old factory. He always ran faster. I used to pretend to trip, just so he would come back and laugh and pull me up. His voice cracked, not loudly, but enough to break her heart wide open. Luella reached out, slowly, carefully, and slipped her hand into his. Cassian didn't look at her, but his fingers closed around hers like a drowning man gripping something solid. I always hoped, he whispered, even after everything. I hoped he would come back. Luella stepped closer, resting her forehead lightly against his shoulder. You didn't lose because you loved him, she murmured. He was lost because he didn't know how to love you back. Cassian closed his eyes and let himself feel it. The estate was quiet for days. No celebrations, no victory, only recovery. Rian handled the logistics, negotiating peace, stabilizing territory, reassuring allies. Mara oversaw the households, keeping everything running with quiet efficiency. Life continued, slow, steady, fragile. Cassian spent most of his time in the study or the courtyard, silent and thoughtful. Luella checked his wound regularly, her hands gentle, her presence constant. She did not try to fill silence with comfort. She understood that grief was not a wound to be stitched. It was a room you learn to walk through without breaking. One evening, Cassian sat by the fireplace, the glow outlining the sharp lines of his face. Luella joined him, curling one leg beneath her, close but not intrusive. Cassian spoke first, voice quiet. Axton was my past. Luella listened. But you are my future. Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the weight of his words. She didn't respond with declarations, with poetry, or promises she couldn't keep. She took his hand, brought it to her lips, pressed a kiss to his knuckles, a vow made without sound. Cassian's throat tightened. His hand trembled only once, and she felt it. He leaned his forehead against hers, breath warm, the world smaller, softer. I don't know how to be this, he whispered. Loved. Luella smiled gently. Then learn with me. Cassian closed his eyes, not in pain, but in relief. The fire crackled softly. Outside, winter continued. Inside, a heart long starved finally began to thaw. Weeks passed. Snow melted. The river thawed. The Vale district shifted from tense and bracing to stable, steady, breathing again. Cassian had meetings with community heads, resolved disputes, rebuilt supply lines. His leadership returned full force, but something about him had changed. The coldness he once carried as armor no longer dominated him. He stood tall, still, commanding, but the ice had cracks where warmth lived now. Luella found small ways to bring life back into the estate. Fresh flowers on the dining table, soft music in the evenings, warm light in hallways once shadowed. The people noticed. They saw their leader walk not alone, but beside someone. Not guarded, not unreachable. Human. One afternoon, as Luella helped a gardener prune frost-damaged plants in the courtyard, 2 children ran by, laughing, carefree. The sound startled her at first. Joy felt fragile here. But Cassian came outside then, watching the children with a look she had never seen from him, something close to longing. Luella wiped her hands and approached him. You would be a good father, she said softly.
Cassian's breath faltered. He looked at her, truly looked. "Do you want children?" he asked. Luella didn't hesitate. "Only if they grow up safe, loved, and free." Cassian nodded slowly. "Then we build that world. Not someday, not maybe. Now, together." But peace does not erase scars. It does not undo grief. One night, Cassian awoke breathless, mind caught halfway between memory and nightmare. He sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders shaking with quiet, restrained pain. Luella awoke instantly. She didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She simply sat beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, holding him the way no one ever had before. Cassian buried his face against her collarbone, not sobbing, not breaking, just releasing. Finally. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. When he could breathe again, he whispered, "My whole life, I believed I was meant to stand alone." Luella ran her fingers through his hair, slow and steady. "You don't have to anymore." Cassian turned his head, pressing a slow, trembling kiss to his palm. "You stayed," he murmured, "even when you could have run." Luella shook her head. "I didn't stay because I couldn't leave." She leaned her forehead to his. "I stayed because I finally belong somewhere." Cassian's eyes softened, warm, unguarded, a quiet sunrise after years of night. "You belong with me," he whispered. It was not a claim. It was a home. The next morning, the estate felt different. Brighter, lighter. Cassian walked beside Luella through the courtyard, their fingers interlaced. A simple gesture, but to those who saw it, it meant everything. Mara paused and bowed her head slightly, not out of formality, but respect. Rian watched from the balcony, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but the faintest hint of relief touched his eyes. Cassian glanced at Luella. "There will always be danger," he said. "Always shadows, always the risk of losing everything." Luella squeezed his hand gently. "Then we return to each other every time." Cassian stopped walking. Snowflakes drifted around them, small, delicate, weightless. He turned to her, cupped her face in both hands, his gaze steady and full. "I love you," he said. No hesitation, no fear, no armor. Luella's breath trembled, but her smile was soft and sure. "I love you back," she whispered back. Cassian leaned in and kissed her. Not with urgency, not with fire, but with all the tenderness of a man who finally found the one place the world could not take from him. The kiss was slow, warm, real. The kind that changes lives. The kind that heals old wounds. The kind that builds new futures. When they finally parted, snow melting on their eyelashes, the estate quiet around them, Cassian whispered against her lips, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." And Luella didn't just believe it. She knew it, because love had survived the fire. And now, it was time to build the world they deserved.
Spring did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, melting snowbanks, soft rain washing the streets clean, the river thawing into a gentle current again. The Vale district changed with it. Shops reopened. Families walked through the market without glancing over their shoulders. The estate was no longer just a fortress. It was a home with open doors, warm halls, and laughter returning in small, cautious pieces. Cassian stood on the balcony one morning, overlooking the streets as sunlight spilled across the district. The scars of winter, both the real and the unseen, were still there, but life grew around them. Healing was not fast. It was not loud. It was patient. And Cassian had learned patience. Luella joined him, wrapping her arms softly around his waist from behind. He leaned into her touch without hesitation, something that still felt quietly miraculous. "They trust you," she murmured, watching people walk below. Cassian followed her gaze. "I never wanted power," he said. "I only wanted to keep them safe." Luella rested her cheek against his shoulder. "And now, you can do both. Not alone this time." Cassian turned, pulling her into his arms, holding her close. "Not alone," he echoed. The wind rustled softly around them, gentle and warm. Luella closed her eyes, remembering a time when she had felt invisible, lost, and small. Now, she was standing in the arms of a man who led thousands, and he held her like she was the center of his world. Not because she saved him, not because he protected her, but because they chose each other, and they kept choosing each other every day. The community gathered in the courtyard a week later, not for war, not for mourning, but to remember Axton. There were no grand speeches, no dramatics, just quiet truth. Cassian stood before the gathered crowd, holding a white lily, the symbol that had once meant threat. Now it meant farewell. "He was my brother," Cassian said. "We shared the same childhood, the same roof, the same blood, but life took us down different roads. I will not pretend he did no harm, but I will not pretend I did not love him." The crowd was silent, not cold, not judgmental, simply listening. Grief does not make us weak. It reminds us that we are capable of loving. And with that, he placed the lily in the river. Luella stood beside him, not holding him up, not being held up, but standing as his equal. The river carried the lily downstream, gentle, steady, and something in Cassian exhaled. Not pain, release. After the gathering, as people dispersed, Rian approached Cassian and Luella. "The district is stable. All territories are pledged. There will be no challenge." Cassian nodded once, but it was Luella who looked at Rian and said, "Thank you for protecting him, for protecting us." Rian's expression softened, the first true smile she had ever seen from him. "Your family," he said simply, and for the first time, Luella believed it. Later that evening, Cassian led Luella to the old greenhouse on the west side of the estate, the glass walls still fogged from winter condensation, vines coiling along rusted beams. She didn't know why they were here, until she saw the table, laid out carefully, wrapped packets of seeds, soil prepared, gardening tools arranged, flowers, fruits, herbs, vegetables. Cassian stood beside her, quiet, vulnerable. He said, "This was my mother's garden." Luella's breath caught. She used to say that planting things is an act of faith. Cassian looked at her then, really looked. He said, "I want to build something that grows, not something I have to defend." Luella felt her heart swell, slow and full. She stepped closer, placing her hands over his. "Then we plant," she said. They spent the afternoon working in quiet harmony, hands in warm soil, seeds buried gently beneath. The greenhouse filled with soft laughter, shared stories, occasional silence that said more than words ever could. When they finally stepped back to look at their work, the garden was not beautiful yet, just beginnings. But beginnings are sacred. Cassian slipped his hand into hers. He whispered, "We're allowed to have this." Luella nodded, eyes warm. "Yes, we are." The sun set behind the greenhouse, casting golden light through glass, illuminating them in soft amber glow.
Two people who had walked through war, loss, and fear, and still found their way back to something tender. Not by accident, by choice. As the days passed, Cassian gradually returned to the responsibilities of leadership, not out of necessity, but for the sake of the community that relied on him. He held council meetings in the main hall, his voice steady, his authority unquestioned. But now when he spoke, he did not speak alone. Luella sat beside him, not silently, not ornamental, but offering perspective that was gentle, human, and wise. When disputes rose, Cassian handled strategy, Luella handled hearts, and the district flourished. People greeted her in the streets, not with fear, not with awe, but with trust. Children waved, elders smiled, shopkeepers offered her bread, fruit, flowers. She was no longer a stranger in a dangerous world. She was Luella Hart, the woman who softened the wolf without breaking him. One evening, as they walked home from the market, a small girl tugged Luella's sleeve. "Is it true," she asked shyly, "that the Vale district is safe now?" Luella kneeled, smiling warmly. "Yes," she said, "because we take care of each other." The girl nodded, satisfied, and ran back to her mother. Cassian watched the exchange, his expression soft, full of something like pride. When Luella stood, he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. He said, "This place is better because of you." Luella rested her hand against his chest. "This place is better because of us." They continued walking, the city lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. Their footsteps matched, their shadows stretched together across the cobblestone street. For the first time, Cassian was not walking toward war. He was walking toward life. That night, back in their room, Cassian stood by the window, watching the river reflect starlight. Luella came up behind him, arms slipping around his waist. He leaned into her touch, not like a man leaning on support, but like a man allowing himself to be loved. He said, "I didn't think I would live to see peace." Luella rested her cheek against his back. "Peace isn't a moment. It's a choice we make every day." Cassian turned, lifting her face to his. He said, "Then I choose you." His voice was steady, sure. Luella's breath caught. "And I choose you." He kissed her, slow at first, then deeper, fuller, like he had been waiting his whole life to learn how to love someone gently. Their hands intertwined, their bodies pressed close. There was no rush, no desperation, just two souls meeting where the world could not reach them. When they finally parted, Cassian held her face in his hands. His voice was soft. "Marry me." The world stilled. Luella's heart surged, not with shock, not with fear, but with recognition. "Yes," she whispered, smiling through tears. Cassian exhaled, a sound like years of walls finally falling. He kissed her again, and the world outside softened into quiet night. Tomorrow the final chapter would begin. Not war, not loss, but the beginning of a life built together.
Spring warmed the world slowly, like a shy guest learning the shape of a new home. Soft blossoms bloomed along the river, petals drifting across the water like confetti. The Vale district had changed, no longer bracing for attack, no longer defined by tension. Laughter returned to the market streets. Music spilled from open windows. People walked without fear. Peace was not loud. It settled like a gentle blanket over everything. In the courtyard of the estate, long tables were set with white linens and fresh flowers from the greenhouse Luella and Cassian had nurtured together. The air smelled of rosemary, warm bread, and early roses. Guests gathered quietly, Not the glamorous elite of distant cities, but the people who had lived through winter beside them. Shopkeepers, guards, families, elders. Ryan stood near the entrance, coat crisp, posture composed, but the softness in his eyes revealed how deeply he had waited for this moment. Cassian stood at the front of the courtyard, beneath an archway of vines and spring blossoms. He wore a dark suit, simple, elegant, and for the first time in his life, he looked entirely at peace, not because the world was safe, but because he no longer faced it alone. Then the music changed, gentle, soft, like a memory unfolding. The courtyard fell silent, and Luella stepped forward. She wore white, not extravagant, not heavy, but a soft dress that moved like water around her, embroidered with tiny stitched flowers that looked like new growth. Her hair fell in loose waves, a sprig of jasmine woven above her ear. She walked slowly, not nervous, not unsure, just full of quiet, radiant certainty. Cassian's breath caught. The man feared by cities, the man who had once walked alone through snow-stained red, his eyes filled with the kind of emotion a person feels only once in a lifetime. She was not just the girl who saved him. She was the woman he lived for. Luella reached him, and the world seemed to narrow to only the space between them. No crowd, no history, no war. Just them. Cassian's hand trembled as it found hers, not from weakness, but because he had never held anything this precious. The officiant began speaking, but neither of them looked away from one another. They listened with their hearts, not their ears. When it was time to speak, Cassian lifted her hands slowly, as though he was holding something sacred. His voice was quiet, steady, but deep with meaning. I was born into a world that taught me love was a weakness, that to care was to lose, that to hold anything close was to hand your enemies a weapon. Luella's eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with recognition. But then, Cassian continued, you found me in the snow, not as the man I was feared to be, but as the man I had forgotten how to be. His breath shook just once. You did not save me because I was strong. You saved me because I was human. And the courtyard held its breath. Luella squeezed his hands, her voice soft but unwavering. I used to think love was something given to the deserving, something that happened to people who were chosen or lucky or unbroken. Cassian's eyes flickered, pain and hope meeting there. But love, Luella whispered, is something we build, day by day, wound by wound, choice by choice. She took a breath. And I choose you, not because you are strong, not because you protected me, but because I see you, and I do not turn away. No applause, no cheers. Just silence thick with love too deep for sound. The officiant nodded gently, giving them space to finish with the simplest vow of all. Cassian Vale, Luella whispered, voice almost trembling with emotion. I am yours. Cassian's eyes softened, completely, wordlessly. And I am yours, he said. They leaned toward one another, and their foreheads touched first. Because this love had always begun in quiet closeness, not urgency. Their kiss was not dramatic or wild. It was slow, sure, certain. A sealing of something sacred. When they pulled apart, the courtyard exhaled with them, soft applause, warm laughter, a few tears. Ryan stepped forward, lifting a glass. He said to the two people, voice steady but full, to the two people who taught us that strength is not the absence of fear,
but the courage to love despite it. Laughter murmured through the crowd. Mara wiped her eyes discreetly. The children threw flower petals into the air, petals swirling like spring snow. Cassian took Luella's hand and led her to the first dance. Not a practice dance, not one meant to impress, just two people holding each other, moving slowly beneath strings of warm lights. Luella rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath scarred ribs, the heart she had saved, and the heart that had chosen her. Cassian closed his eyes, breathing in her presence, soft jasmine, gentle warmth, safety.
"I didn't think I would ever have this," he murmured. Luella smiled against his chest. "You earned it." He held her tighter, not possessively, but with love that asked permission and was given freely. They did not speak again, not because there were no words left, but because the moment itself was the vow. As night settled, stars appeared, soft, scattered diamonds across the velvet sky. Lanterns glowed along the courtyard walls. Music drifted gently, laughter weaving softly between table conversations. Cassian and Luella slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand toward the greenhouse. The air smelled of new leaves and warm earth. Inside, sprouts had begun to break through the soil, tiny, determined, reaching for light. Cassian stopped beside the bed of seedlings. "This garden will outlive us," he said quietly. Luella nodded, her fingers brushing the small leaves. "Let it. Let something good grow because of us." Cassian turned to her, expression soft. Not the leader now, not the fighter, just the man. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. Luella shook her head slowly. "Only that we didn't find each other sooner." His chest rose on a slow breath, not burdened now, but full. He cupped her face gently and kissed her again, warm, unhurried, the kind of kiss that said, "We have time now." When they parted, Luella leaned her head against his chest, listening to the garden rustle softly around them. Outside, life was still imperfect, the world still dangerous, healing still slow. But they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. Cassian whispered into her hair, "Whatever comes." Luella finished for him. We faced it together. He smiled, small, real. Always. Seasons passed. The garden grew. Children played in the courtyard. The Veiled district thrived, not under fear, not under force, but under care. The world still whispered the name Cassian Vale, but no longer as a warning, as a legend. A story of a man who once ruled with iron, but chose instead to build with gentleness. And beside him, always, was Luella, the girl who had once worked in a quiet cafe, unseen by the world, now the heart of a kingdom forged not by blood, but by love. They grew older, not quickly, not suddenly, but in the way people do when life is full. Their love did not fade. It deepened. Quiet, steady, certain. And sometimes on winter nights, when snow fell softly like the night they first met, Cassian would take Luella's hand and lead her outside to the courtyard, where he would hold her. Close, warm, unbreakable, and whisper against her hair, "You saved me." And Luella would answer, always, "You saved me too." And the snow would fall. Soft, endless, gentle, just like the love that held them.
Thank you for staying to the end. please do well to like and subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comment. It means a lot to me.